Welcome to our very first Time Travel with Travis. I'm Travis, Director of Education at the History Museum in South Bend, also the St. Joseph County historian. I'm not standing in the woods for no apparent reason, but we're going to take a trip back in time, long way back in time. The area that you see behind me is a trail, believe it or not, and it leads down to the St. Joe River. This path was used by the French explorer Robert La Salle in December of 1679 to portage or make a shortcut between here, the portage, the St. Joseph River portage, and the Kankakee River, which was at one time about 5 miles here from here. And La Salle and his men sailed around Lake Michigan and found the outlet or the mouth of the St. Joe River, and then rode with their canoes and all their belongings up here, and then got out here at the portage, and they were able to walk with all their belongings and everything, like I said, and connected up with the Kankakee River, which carried them farther west, and it dumps into the Kankakee dumps into the Chicago River, and the Chicago River eventually runs into the Mississippi River. So La Salle, by using the Great Lakes system, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, and Lake Michigan, he was pretty much able to traverse a third of the United States just by using this portage. Now, he came through here in 1679, but back then they didn't have like newspapers that say the portage is located here by here, and he didn't have a GPS. So he had heard about this from Native Americans back in Ontario, where he was located, about there was some kind of shortcut between here and getting down to the Big River. They just called it a Big River. Potawatomi, Miami, Iroquois, lots of Native Americans had known about this portage for we don't even know how long. And eventually word was passed from generation to generation to generation that this was a shortcut between two good-sized rivers that you could actually paddle a canoe. So this was an important, or one of the first interstates through this area, and it may have been traveled by the explorer James Marquette in 1673, which would have predated La Salle's visit through here, but there's no real written record that Marquette actually put his foot down on this ground. There is proof that La Salle did, because he kept a copious diary, and much of that diary is now been translated into English, being French. La Salle actually did not start out to be an explorer. He actually was a Catholic priest, and he was actually born in France and then immigrated to Ontario, where he was with a Catholic order to be a missionary amongst the Native Americans that were the first peoples that were in Ontario, Canada. He did it for a couple years and asked to be relieved of his Catholic obligations, and so he ceased being a priest and a missionary, and decided on the behalf of France that he would try to explore lands that really had not been known. There was a lot of rumors that went around that at the time that La Salle came out here, there were still possible dinosaurs running around, possible tribes of cannibals running around out here. So those rumors were what they were just rumors. But when La Salle got here, the place was packed. All kinds of animals, deer, elk, bear, all kinds of beaver and mink, river otters, that sort of thing, living not only in the woods but also in the river. So when La Salle came through, of course, he took notes of all of that, and it wasn't long before this area then started to open up to some of the French fur trading that came, which was kind of the first international business, because animals that were trapped here, all in the what would later become the St. Joseph County area, were gathered up and traded and shipped back to Europe and England, and all those furs were turned into clothing or accents for clothing. The Pope had robes that were made from beaver pelts that were possibly from this area. Kings and queens, because basically those were the only people that could afford that kind of luxury. Basically, by the time that most of the beaver population in this area was pretty well trapped out, fur kind of fell out of fashion because other fibers came in, cotton, linen, that sort of thing. So that international business kind of just tapered off, and by that time you mostly had a few people living here at the time. This area, the Portage area, became basically a farm. The McCartney family owned it for quite a while and grew crops on it, and then much later, after South Bend was well established, a cemetery was started out here. And so what this area then became is Riverview Cemetery out here. And so from 1679 all the way up to the 20th century, this land has been used for something. Traveling across, using as a shortcut, using as a way to get down to the river to trap and fish and hunt. Today, because of the draining of the Kankakee Portage, which the Kankakee River actually flooded it, that was between the southwest side of South Bend all the way around to Chicago. That was all drained in the early 1900s. So the headwaters of the Kankakee shrank. And so this would not be a shortcut today. You would have to walk from here to almost Crown Point to find the Kankakee River deep enough that you could put a canoe in and row. So because the Kankakee Marsh was not drained at that time, that's why the headwaters were so close here. But over the centuries that have gone by, the airport's on most of it. Houses and neighborhoods are on most of the Portage. There's hardly anything that if LaSalle happened to come back right now, he would be formally lost. He could not find what he found when he came through here in 1679. But that's LaSalle's journey through here. Supposedly, he came back in 1681 with a treaty, a note from the French king to try to get the Native Americans that were living in this area to fight on behalf of France and not Britain and not Spain. Everybody was trying to grab all of this land out here. This area, and especially like Niles, Michigan area. Niles is called the City of Four Flags because it was under 4 different nations. The United States now, of course, but you also had Spanish control, French control, and British control. So at some time or another, this area has belonged to different countries before it belonged to us here in America. So this area has a lot of very old history. People, Hoosiers here in the state, have no clue that our state, or what would later become our state, has such an old history of having folks traverse through its area that even before Indiana became the crossroads of America because of all the interstates lining up through here, it was basically a very early interstate, especially based here, mainly because of the river, and that was about the only way to get around. So that's LaSalle and his mission through here. Now, like I said, he came through in 1681. Supposedly he met with Potawatomi chiefs, Miami chiefs, not far from here, right along the Portage again, and they met under a pretty good sized bur oak tree. And that tree then became called the Council Oak Tree. If you are a local of South Bend, ask your grandparents or great-grandparents if they've ever heard of the Council Oak and get ready to hear a story, because most adults and senior citizens that still live in this area have seen and or visited the Council Oak Tree in what is now Highland Cemetery. The only thing left of the Council Oak is basically pieces of the trunk. And that's about it. But supposedly LaSalle and the members, the head chiefs of the Potawatomi Miami Indians met under there, and supposedly the treaty was signed and there was goodwill going all around. But the circumstances of the treaty really didn't stand too much. Native Americans were kind of wishy-washy in their support of who they were going to support, but nonetheless, he came here on behalf of the French king, which not a lot of areas in the United States now can claim that. So South Bend's fortunate, St. Joe County is fortunate that we've had interstate, a very early interstate through here, a portage through here that played in the early stages of what would later become the United States. And we also had one of the first international businesses up here, fur trading, fur trapping, because of the St. Joseph River. And that was the major way that you would get around, because the woods were too thick to be carrying canoes through and cutting the undergrowth. It was too tough. So it was a lot easier to use the waterways around here. So hope you enjoyed this time travel. We'll be back in a little while and give you another taste and take a time travel back to some of the early time of South Bend and St. Joe County's history. I'm Travis Childs. We'll see you then.